670.
That's real clean.
Hi, this is Jim Elliott from Dive Hard, a nonprofit that helps children, vets, and others with disabilities through scuba therapy. You're listening to Smart Talk. The Mike Nowak Show starts in 3, 2, 1.
Do you want to hear an insect joke?
I suppose.
All right. Do you know the one about the termite walking into the bar?
No.
The termite walks into the bar and says, "Where's the bartender?" How about the grasshopper? Grasshopper walks into a bar and says, the bartender says, "Hey, you know, we got a drink named after you." And the grasshopper says, "You got a drink named Steve?"
Is that it?
An inchworm crawls into the bar, and he crawls all the way up the bar still. It takes him a long time. And he's just about to order that drink. And the bartender sees him and says, "Hey, we don't serve no inchworms in this bar." And he throws him out the door. Exactly 1 year later, there's a knock at the door, and the bartender answers, and the inchworm says, "What the hell was that all about?" You see, it's because inchworms are really slow, and it took him a whole entire year to get back to the door.
Are we finished?
It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Green, gardening, and environment radio. Flavored with a dash of humor. Welcome to intelligent, irreverent talk about plants and the planet they grow on. Your questions, comments, and participation are always welcome at 877-711-5611.
Good planets are hard to find. Temperate zones and tropic climes. And true currents and thriving seas. Wind blowing through breathing trees. Strong ozone and safe sunshine. Well, good planets are hard to find. Good planets are in demand.
This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com.
Jet streams, perfect air.
And here they are, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
Well, good planets are in demand. Right.
Hey, welcome to the show. And if you're watching on the YouTubes or the Facebook, Peggy and I are doing our approximation of what you see when you're in a Zoom conference
Hello.
with a lot of people.
Hello?
Hello?
Is this
Hello?
thing on?
Yeah,
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can see your ceiling fan. Hello? I can see your pictures up.
Oh, there you are.
When-
Good
when you're-
morning.
When you're on a Zoom conference, and of course on radio this doesn't apply, but even you folks listening just on radio right now have been in a Zoom conference over the last 3 or 4 months, and you've seen people who basically they shoot the shot from their camera on their computer is right at the ceiling, and then you can see almost the top of their head, and then you got lots of ceiling. And in your case, Peggy, there's a ceiling fan going. I don't even have a ceiling fan in this room.
And the fan makes it worse because you can just stare at it and stare at it and
Right
stare at it.
round and round, they're spinning and spinning and spinning. So this is just a word of advice to folks. Show some respect for your fellow conferencees and try to get a shot of you, instead of your ceiling. In fact, now I got to adjust this thing.
Or at least a shot of a house plant.
Well, and I've got two behind me, including my wonderful ZZ plant, which is sprouting. ZZ plants, they're amazing because they're one of those plants you almost never have to water, and if you do water, you'll probably kill it.
Yeah.
I have killed a couple of ZZ plants, and this one is rocking. You have to be really careful about the watering. And this has got three sprouts.
Nice.
Sprouts coming up. Yeah.
Nice. And I've got peace lily back here blooming.
Yeah.
Both of them are my other plants blooming too.
I've got visual aid. I might as well. Here it is. Here's the ZZ plant, and you can see right there that nice bright green. That is the sprout.
Very nice.
Yeah, and then another one coming up there. It's great. All right, let's put in for you folks on radio. Sorry about that, but
and then if you put it outside, then it becomes part of your garden. And maybe somebody wants to see it.
Oh, you're going to refer to what I did the other day. Yeah, I did a garden tour of my yard for the Lombard Garden Club here in the Chicago area. Yeah, give them a ding because they they've taken the charge here and just decided, we're going to do virtual garden talks because I do a number of garden talks during the year, and those have all been canceled except if you do it online. So what I did is I went on a tour of my garden. And what was interesting, when I woke up on Friday, which is when I did it, it was storming. I mean, lightning, thunder, rain pouring down in buckets.
Drama.
My cat hiding under the couch. And I just kind of looked at the radar and I went, I think it's going to clear. I think it is. And it cleared about 15 minutes before we started the thing. And the yard was gorgeous and beautiful. Here's the thing, though. So I did an hour where I'm doing a tour of my garden, and they're streaming it, and everybody's watching it on the stream. And the first thing we had to figure out is why the bandwidth was so low. It's because everybody had their video on. So now we had to tell everybody, turn off your video, just use the audio, and you watch Mike. Mike will be the only person who has a video streaming because otherwise there's no signal.
He doesn't need to see you while he's in his garden.
So that was it. And then we had to tell people, mute your microphones, please. Please don't do that because that is going to, because the screen will go to you when you do that and not Mike. And the whole idea is get the tour of his yard. So I'm going to have to take a look at that. I haven't looked all the way through it yet, but I can see there's places where people's names pop up in the middle of the presentation. But I can
chiming in.
I can edit.
And your ZZ plant was chiming in too, probably.
No, my ZZ plant was in the house, nice and safe. But I have to say, I was exhausted. And first of all, I was drenched in sweat, and it wasn't the rain; it was the sweat. I had flop sweat from doing the thing, and I was exhausted. I couldn't tell you. I was out of breath half the time because I'm bending and stretching and wandering from one side. Oh, and look at this, and look at that, and look at that. And I was just complete. I had to collapse onto the couch when I got back inside. Unbelievable. So, but I'm looking forward to doing more. So let's do more. So
you got in practice for a 60-second video.
Right. And if those of you who are listening have a garden club and you want to do a virtual tour of Mike's yard, which looks better than it ever has in his entire life, I would be happy to do that. So give me a holler, Mike at MikeNovak.net. All right. We've just got 5 minutes here. We got to tell people about something very exciting that's going on from Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards. And that is something that you will find if you go to the Facebook page. Even better, go to my website, MikeNovak.net. I have the information for the 60-second garden video challenge that SIGA is putting on this year. The COVID sort of knocked us flat. So the timing and everything, I mean, even if we wanted to have a garden walk, not a garden walk, a garden contest and have people enter it, they'd have to get their gardens ready and enter. And there's a lot of protocol and paperwork, and we could never get it done now in time. But we decided, let's do something different this year. And so what we decided, the committee, which Peggy is on and I'm on, and folks like Christine Nye, formerly of the Shed Aquarium, and Julie Taylor now from the Shed Aquarium, and Latasha Reagans from Illinois Extension. We decided
Julie Samuels
from Chicago Community Gardeners Association, MJ Garnier, however she pronounces her last name. She's
MJ.
MJ, that's what we call it. We decided, well, let's do a video contest. That means anybody can enter. And we're talking not just Chicago. We're talking about anywhere, I guess, in the world. I assume the United States and Canada, if you're listening there. But we are telling people you've got 60 seconds. That's the way it works. And if you go to MikeNovak.net and click on, or you could go to ChicagoGardeningAwards.org as well, and right on the homepage it explains everything, and it even has sample videos. And I was reminded of this by doing my garden talk on Friday, because I had an hour to do the garden walk on Friday, but I did a 60-second version that we have as a sample at Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards, and you can see how hard it is. but you can get creative, and you don't have to do it all the same way. We hope people get
Yeah.
really creative with their videos.
You can
and
take
they-
photos and put them together as a video.
Sure, if you wanted, and if you use music, you got to use public domain. Don't use copyrighted music, or we can't use that. So you're going to have to get extra special creative. Maybe if you're a musician, you can do that. And you know what? You explain a little more, because I realize I don't have the clock, the world clock up here. If I don't have it,
We have about 2 minutes here.
yeah, that's why I realized we got about 2 minutes before we break.
So the entries open July 1st at chicagogardeningawards.org, as Mike said, and go into September. One entry, and it's people's choice. So get
Yeah,
all your friends to.
Well, the idea that we'll pop them on our YouTube
Mhm.
page, and then you give them a thumbs up. If you like it, we're going to ask people not to give a thumbs down. I mean, it's a gardening contest.
Yeah, come on, be nice.
Don't be mean to people. And then we'll see what happens. We have the best part of this. We have no idea whether anybody's going to participate in
I'm
this.
hoping it goes viral, personally, but
I
it'd be
think that
fun.
would be cool. 60 seconds. Take your camera, take your cell phone, go out in your yard, shoot a 60-second video, and then submit it. You can load it right up there to a Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards. Again, that is chicagogardeningawards.org. Or if you don't remember that, go to my website, MikeNovak.net, or go to the Facebook page, because I've got in the explanation of today's show, I've got that information. And we'll get Kayla to put more up about that.
I'll send her the links.
So, ladies and germs, start your cameras. The 60-second garden video challenge is going on. All right, when we come back, let's talk about wildlife in our gardens. Last week we had an entomologist. Now we figure out how to keep those insects happy. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be right back.
The grass grows tall on the hilltop tonight, not a carbon footprint to be seen. A kingdom of diversification, and I feel like I'm the king. The wind is howling and the blades of grass are long, kind of like my hair during quarantine.
Everybody sing. Okay, welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. That is part one. You're going to hear part two after the next break. And that is a takeoff, of course, on Let It Go from the movie Frozen, but it's a naturalist out in the field. It's Samuel L. Lewis State Park in York, Pennsylvania. They put that together, and he sings pretty well, and he's out in the field and he's doing it, and you'll hear some of it later on. So I thought it was particularly appropriate for the guests we have on the show this morning. We've got Mary Phillips, the Senior Director of A Garden for Wildlife with the National Wildlife Federation. She was on our show last year. We talked about the National Pollinator Garden Network and the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. See, you've got the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. We have the 60-second garden video challenge from Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards. And basically, as we explained in the last segment, we want people to go out in their gardens and in 60 seconds show us something fun, and the best ones will win valuable Wally prizes. Whatever they are.
We forgot to say it is free too.
And it's free. Yes, I keep forgetting to say that. It's free. It's open to anyone.
So Mary, Jill, you guys can enter.
Great.
Anybody, anywhere in the country, or even the world. I don't know. I'd love to get one from Sweden. Let's see what happens here. Okay. So that's Mary Phillips, and the other, and Jill, I'm going to ask you to pronounce your last name for me.
Utrup.
Okay, that's what I thought. Utrup. I assumed it was that. I just hate screwing up people's last names or first names too. I get that wrong sometimes. Jill Utrup is a fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from the Minnesota-Wisconsin Ecological Services Field Office. You're in Region 3 of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, correct?
That's correct.
And they're here today because, well, last week we talked to world famous entomologist Dr. May Barenbaum about our insect crisis. And that conversation was more about what's going on. How do we know that we are in insect decline? We are seeing insect decline. This week we thought, okay, now let's do the flip side of that. How do we stop? How do we reverse insect decline, or at least how do we try? And how do we try in our own backyards? And Mary, start with you, because one of the ways you guys have started that is the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, and you blew through 1 million gardens last year. Where are you now with that?
Thanks. Actually, it took 4 years to surpass 1 million gardens. And we are continuing to encourage people to garden for pollinators. National Wildlife Federation actually started in 1973 to get people to plant for pollinators and other wildlife as well. So the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge was something we and other habitat backyard programs and the garden trade came together to really ramp that up and go to a much higher scale. And it really has been effective, and we're continuing to get people registering, creating gardens and registering them on the Million Garden platform. So,
well, now what do? Do you make it the 2 million challenge as you move forward?
No, we're just continuing to encourage people. Yeah, it was a group of co-founders that came together, and it was all of our individual volunteer time on top of our full-time jobs to create the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. So, we did that really aggressively for 4 years, surpassed the million, and we have still so much interest that we are supporting the platform and still encouraging people and still sharing resources, but it's not as aggressive, let's say, in promotion as it has been in the past, only because of bandwidth and resources. And each of our own programs have all actually taken off. And I know, Mike, we're going to talk a little bit later, but we have all been inundated with a demand for resources around pollinator gardening and habitat gardening in general this spring, that it was all many of us could do to keep our own stuff afloat. So the million's still going on, but it's not as, we're not starting any new goals, let's just say.
Okay, no, I understand that. During this pandemic, for a lot of folks, it's been everything we can possibly do just to maintain the status quo and keep moving forward. And especially when you're, you know, here, I can do radio in my living room, which I'm doing right now. But if you're a naturalist, like the two of you are, that's got to be really tough, because you can get out in the field, but you got to be really careful about it, right, Mary?
Yes, you do. And we've really worked nationally to give people guidance about what can actually work. The biggest thing that's been hard for people is that even though we have all been restricted somewhat, the demand for gardening has not slowed down. In fact, we've seen a 6 times the amount of traffic to our website for Garden for resources, for pollinator resources, and actually I've been working a lot in the last couple months with the garden trade to see and see what garden centers were doing to guide people safely with curbside pickup and delivery. And a lot of these folks had to scramble really instantaneously to become, web experts and online platform pay systems. It's really been amazing. And in our network, we've been working with nature centers and native plant societies and our network of community wildlife habitats where they have plant sales every spring. So all these plant sales, it was a complete reconfiguration of how to get those plants to the public.
We had the same thing here. We have a comprehensive list of plant sales on my website, and we were scrambling to get all the right information. We've got less than a minute left, but Jill, give me 45 seconds about what you're up to during this pandemic.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, we've talked a little bit on your show before about the rusty patch bumblebee. So the critically endangered species. One of the things that's a lot of what our office does is we work on threatened endangered species recovery. So that is one of kind of our priority species. And as kind of an outreach tool, but in general, just kind of how another way to learn more about bumblebees in general, we have what we call the Backyard Bumblebee Count. That is going to be taking place the end of July 24th through August 2nd.
I'll tell you what, hold that thought, and we'll get back to the Backyard Bumblebee Count. When we return, that is Jill Utrup and Mary Phillips. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be right back. The world has has changed. Good. So that's all there. Did you take that photo of the rusty patch bumblebee? You did take that, right?
I did. Yep.
Wow. Where was that?
It was actually at a pollinator garden that's not too far away from my house, in Burnsville, Minnesota. So,
But you said in our email conversation that I thought that you were having a hard time finding them there, but they were more prevalent in the Chicago area. What's the story on that?
no, well, actually, they're still hanging on in our metro areas. So we do have, they're still extremely rare, of course, but we still have, some hanging on in the Twin Cities area, also in Madison and in the Chicago area as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're finding them elsewhere too, but we're still kind of trying to learn as far as why we're seeing them still hang on in these more metro areas. It could be just due to the fact that more people are looking for them in these,
You're right. Well, don't get me started, but it's like the count for COVID. Well, the numbers aren't going to be high unless we count. So stop counting.
Thank you. Got 60 seconds.
All right. Thanks, Randall.
So this is Mary. Jill's, what you're talking about, the rusty patch bumblebee and concentrations in urban areas. We actually found in the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge through the resource, the abundance and diversity of plantings in urban areas have been so dense. We're seeing a real return of bee populations in those areas.
I'm so glad to hear that because, that's one of the concerns we have.
I'm Chicago Smart Talk.
Creating lots of habitats, from the field mice to brown bats. Conceal, don't feel, just do not mow. Well, now you know. Let it grow, let it grow. Don't cut it back anymore. Let it grow, let it grow. Turn away and let the wildflowers show. Here I stand in the heat of the day. Let the storms rage on. Erosion won't bother me anyway.
All right, erosion doesn't bother me anyway. I like the don't mow. There's a
there we go.
There's a message again. That's from Samuel S. Lewis State Park. Somebody, I don't know. I think somebody sent it to me, and so I grabbed.
Is that when naturalists have too much time on their hands?
Exactly. That's what happened. Well, see, because like the naturalists we have on our show today, Mary Phillips and Jill Utrup, they're stuck in the office sometimes, and not that guy though.
Yeah, except Mary and Jill, we don't expect you to break into song.
Unless you want to. Mary Phillips is from the National Wildlife Federation. Jill Utrup is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're talking about our pollinator friends today, and we left with you, Jill, talking about bumblebees and the challenge you have coming up. Explain that again. Let's start that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started talking about the backyard bumblebee count, and this is actually a project that's run through iNaturalist.
What is iNaturalist?
Yeah, if folks aren't familiar with iNaturalist, it's a citizen science kind of application. Folks can actually go to the website and sign up for it, or actually you can just add an app to your phone. It's pretty simple. But basically, it allows you to, if you have a question if you're kind of wondering, I guess, about a plant that you're looking at and wondering what species it is, you can actually use the app to kind of figure out what it is. And also you can record that, that particular record, and it gives us really great information in terms of different species out there. And with this backyard bumblebee count, this is actually a project through iNaturalist. And it's kind of a targeted time frame. So we're looking at the end of July through beginning of August, because that's kind of a time that, in general, bumblebees are most active. And so it kind of gives us a little slice into kind of their overall abundance and trends over the years in terms of not just our endangered rusty patch bumblebee, but bumblebee populations in general. So
right, rusty patch is sort of the poster child for bumblebees right now and bumblebee decline, but there's a lot of species. I want to ask you about the bumblebees and identification, but first you mentioned apps, online apps for finding. And Mary, this question is addressed to you as well. I find that those online identification apps are often not very good. Can you tell me? You're nodding, and because I'm wondering if you had experience with good ones, because I get pop-ups from, I signed up for one of the apps, and every week they're sending me, hey, check out the new version of the app, and I've tried them, and I'm like, they sometimes really don't come through. Which are the good ones, Jill?
Well, I think that is an issue for sure. I've found actually that iNaturalist is pretty reliable. And really, I mean, there's a little bit more vetting that goes along with those identifications. So once you do submit a particular record, and so basically the app gives you, if you're not sure what it is, it gives you kind of a drop down, and it's best guess based on kind of records that have been submitted previously. So then, you go with maybe kind of that it's best guess, and submit that. And then you have a further verification that needs to happen. So then someone else will kind of check and double check your work and make sure that that's indeed seems to be the kind of the right, species that it's coming up with. So
I'll have to check the iNaturalist app. So what about you, Mary? Have you found?
Yeah, sure. Our iNaturalist is amazing, and we often refer people to iNaturalist as well as the bumblebee count that Jill was talking about. We also, just for general like scientific information and identification, we actually released this past year a whole series of nature guide apps. And these are based on the field guides we had for decades, and they've been put into an app style format that you can download that information. And I'll send you all a link to put on the website for those.
What's the app called, Mary?
It's it's a series of them.
Okay.
Apps, and we have one called like a bundle called Winged Wonders, and it's butterflies, bees, and other insects. So there's a variety of resources there. But I found the same thing, Mike. They all have their strengths, and they all have weaknesses out there. Pollinator Partnership, another partner of ours in the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, also has an insight app, and it also helps you identify not only you can take a picture of insects on a plant, and it gives you actually both that information. So there's a variety of bee particularly apps out there.
Okay, so which takes us back to bumblebees and the rusty patched. It's so interesting. Every time I see a bumblebee in my yard, and I get a lot of bumblebees in my yard, probably because I grow a lot of plants. And I don't know how people can do an ID that quickly to tell if it's a rusty patch bumblebee or not, because it's a fairly subtle marking. And there are other bumblebees that have golden stripes as well. How do you do that, Jill?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, there are some confusing other species that look very similar. But I think what is probably helpful for folks is actually we have a lot of different training tools that are available. One of our partners that we work with very regularly, and I know you talked with Dr. Elaine Evans previously. She's with Minnesota Extension. So in light of COVID, we haven't been able to have many in-person bumblebee trainings for some of their volunteers that are going out and doing kind of some of these formal bumblebee surveys. So they actually recorded one of their trainings recently and put that online. So there's it's a little over an hour. So they have that trainings available free for folks to download and kind of get some initial training before they go out and do these surveys. And then they have a whole bunch of other training resources as well, which is really helpful because, there are some very subtle differences. And one of the species that looks very similar is the brown-belted bumblebee. It does have kind of a rust spot, and it's a very subtle difference because on the abdomen of the bee, it actually doesn't have yellow surrounding that rust spot. So I think some of those different training materials really help because they kind of go through some of those different look-alike species and compare and contrast, so you can really kind of figure out, the differences or
provided they hold still.
Yes.
Which they don't. Of course, they're moving, they're working hard out there. Okay, so.
And that's a good point too, because actually that's why another reason we kind of target that time frame is because some of the plants that are out, the bees, I mean, some of the flowers that are out right now, they're not necessarily spending as much time nectaring in one spot. So it is kind of rather difficult to kind of get a good photo.
Yeah.
But our bergamot or wild bergamot, some of those other species are going to start popping here pretty soon.
Yeah, that's a bergamot plant in the photo you took.
It is, yes, and that's where a lot of the records we're finding them on is actually on a wild bergamot. So
yeah.
Well, here we are, Mary. Even before COVID, you told me that Americans were paying attention to birds, bees, and butterflies, and you say over the last 3 years, 64.1 million.
Yes.
Or 1 in 4 American adults purchased a plant because it was beneficial. So tell us about that survey.
Sure. Yeah. So we're really excited. We partnered with National Garden Association, who's for 20 years now has been doing a national gardening trends survey of the American public. And we were able to ask specific questions to gardening for wildlife. So one of our questions was how many Americans actually purchase plants because they know it'll help either bees, birds, or butterflies. And that's the statistic, Mike, you were just sharing. 1 in 4 have done that in the last 3 years. And this was particularly obviously rewarding because of all the work we did in trying to raise awareness at scale through the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge over these years, but also just to know that folks really are conscious of what they're planting makes a difference. Another statistic there is that we also have seen an increase in, we have a baseline now. Hopefully we'll see an increase next year of people who actually knew they were purchasing a native plant. And that was 7 people, because that's always important. They might be like, "Yay, this helps birds and bees."
Mary, that's funny. I mean, people buying plants to get home. Hey, look, it's a native. Well,
yes.
one would hope we're kind of beyond that, but I can see where that's
especially from a big box store, it's not obvious.
Yeah, I guess not. Or a nativar, because we've had conversations about is a nativar really a native plant, and it has a lot of the attributes of native plants, but is it exactly the same? And it's hard to know.
Yeah. And with nativars, that is a question and you need to look at them. But if they have still kept in their breeding the attributes that are beneficial to wildlife, like nectar and pollen, then it's still, we feel, okay to have in a garden landscape. But that is a touchy question, especially not in a restoration area or anything like that. But it's definitely one that we've dealt with. And the other statistic is we had 1 out of 9 Americans have consciously either have done it or are planning to transform a portion of their lawn to natural or wildflower landscape.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into that. We got a break here. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We're talking pollinators. Stick around and ask a question. We'll be right back.
Actually, we also, the other thing I want to share with you, we actually launched a recipe guide for people to, especially since everyone's home, to create pollinator-friendly herbs, grow them, and then create cocktail and mocktails out of them. So I'll send you the link to that too. Since everyone's home, we thought everyone needed a little close home inspiration.
Oh, that's fun.
Are you guys okay with the sound? Really loud motorcycle just went by. Did that get picked up? Or you guys?
It got picked up a little bit, but it's not a problem, really. I mean, it's not as bad as basil barking.
Wait a minute. So let's see. Tracy just posted Bee Spotter, beespotter.org. That's another good option.
All right, let's use that. Bee Spotter. Yeah, I see that. Tracy DeMarco. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, that's a more local one too. So that's a nice one.
Yeah. And I liked, I was going through the bee contest page. There's a whole section there about getting good bee photos off your phone, which was nice.
Just keep clicking. Just keep clicking. I did that last week. The photo that we used for my blog last week, which was on a non-native plant, it was a bumblebee it was on an oh so easy rose, which is like the only rose I have in my yard, and that's what he was. but I just kept taking boop, bop, 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 and finally, boom! There's one in the middle of everything. Was like, yes, that's the one.
I had a tiny, I think it was a Nodinate yesterday, tiny little dragonfly, but it may or may not have been, but the wings were so transparent. I could not get my phone to focus on it for anything. And he's just
60
posing away
seconds.
for me. Could not get it to focus.
Focus is a problem. It's a, you know what I found with a cell phone with that really helps is back up and zoom in. And for some reason that just it
just on transparent wings, it
doesn't
lock in on it.
tax the focal the focus on the camera as much. So that's what I do. All right, we've
FM.
Ooh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high.
Yeah, I had to play this too. I just thought we need something, just kind of get a ukulele in there and get that Somewhere Over the Rainbow song, and everybody loves that version of it. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Mlecki. I don't even remember the guy who's doing it. I should know his name by now, but Peggy will track it down for me. We've got Jill Utrup, fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from Minnesota, on the Zoom with us. Mary Phillips, the Senior Director of Garden for Wildlife with the National Wildlife Federation. She's also involved with the National Pollinator Garden Network and the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. And whoa, is that me? Hello, I'm hearing ukulele.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Is that you, Nancy? Is that on your end there?
It's gone.
Okay, there it goes.
But that is Israel somebody. I can't think of his last name. He's got a real long last name, but
yeah, I know. That's why I can't remember it. During the break, Mary, you were talking about the response during the pandemic to helping pollinators in backyards. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So we have just been inundated and really more than pleasantly surprised at the outreach. Every year we run a campaign called Butterfly Heroes, and we get funders to give us so much money so that we could actually distribute free pollinator garden starter kits to people who pledged to be a butterfly hero. And we were really excited that we had 15,000 to distribute. And in May, we had over 65,000 people respond.
Wow.
Want to actually be butterfly heroes and plant for wildlife, and particularly obviously pollinators and butterflies. And that's just one example of what we're seeing. We also, the program Garden for Wildlife has had the standing certified wildlife habitat designation for 47 years now. And we thought, gosh, will be a great goal by 2021. We'll reach 250,000 of those nationwide. We're going to hit 250,000 this month in July. We have had double the amount of people planting for pollinators and other wildlife and certifying their yards, the record year in 47 years, and double the amount already just for this year from last year.
Wow.
So it's been absolutely amazing. And our friends and colleagues in the garden trade just blown away at, the demand. People have found this to be so therapeutic. So as much as they do, are wanting to help the pollinators, which is also empowering, you can do something positive. You can help something when you're feeling a little helpless during all of this. It's also being out in nature, getting the vitamin D, getting the fresh air, being in the green. It is so stress reducing. And the people just keep responding and asking. And it's really been heartening to be able to, I didn't expect, I thought, it'll be good. Maybe it'll be a little bit up, but we had no sense of the demand. It's been really, really amazing.
It's stress reducing unless you're doing a 1-hour tour for a garden club.
Well, that's you.
Like I did on Friday, and I was
Yes, but you're a professional. We don't ask people to do that at home.
Do not try this at home, folks.
But to your point, your 60-second video will give people a little fun opportunity to show off all the wonderful work they've been doing.
Yeah. And let's hope this trend stays. Gardening's been growing as a trend. Now, hopefully this focusing on the pollinators and the native gardens people finally are starting to get. Yeah.
And by the way, all that information is on my website on the blog for today's show. Go to MikeNowak.net, MikeNowak.net. I've got the link to the Butterfly Heroes, to the Native Plant Finder, and to the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, the National Wildlife Federation, all of it. And I see that you guys worked with Dr. Doug Tallamy. He's been on the show a number of times, and he has single-handedly changed the world. I mean,
He has.
Which is pretty amazing. There are very few people who take an idea and run with it the way he did and have it resonate so much.
Yes.
Let's go back to Jill then. So what about you? What's been happening during the pandemic with you?
We've been kind of keeping busy too. I mean, I think like what we talked about earlier with this backyard bumblebee count, we're actually going to be using this project for other means as well. So some of our partners, that aren't able to do this kind of face-to-face, kind of typical style, larger bumblebee surveys that are in person are actually going to be there. Pushing the folks that have been helping with them with those types of surveys in the past to our backyard bumblebee count, because it is really simple. I mean, folks can do it on their own and they can do it safely. And actually, you can do it in your own backyard, or you can, in a neighborhood park or wherever. And kind of like Mary was saying, it is really therapeutic too to just get out and watch some bumblebees for a little bit. So, yeah.
It sounds like fun to me. And now I noticed that it's, I had the numbers right here. It's July 24th to August 2nd. So I'm going to take part. I'm going to go to the backyard bumblebee count. I've got that link up there, and I've got the link to the iNaturalist site, and just see what it's all about. It sounds like a way to get involved. It's very cool, Jill.
Yeah, excellent. And I can also send you those links to the different training resources as well, which I think will be really helpful for folks before they do get out next month. So
perfect. Perfect.
All right. So that leaves us moving forward into the summer here. What, Mary, do you hope to get accomplished other than 250,000 people joining you by the end of the summer?
Well, we hope people continue to plant and actually start thinking about, if they haven't already installed plants that will bloom in the fall, to get those in based on their zone. And we've got some plant lists on our website, as well as I know Jill's website does as well, for where your ecoregion is, what the best plants are. And many of our plants, we actually have ecoregional guides that actually Dr. Tallamy, who you mentioned before, actually worked with us on to create, come from the Native Plant Finder, which is a tool we have that you put your zip code in, and it will give you plants that provide the highest number, host plants for the highest numbers of butterflies and moths, which also feed birds, by the way. That's a really good tool to begin, continue planting your gardens.
As May Berenbaum said last week, moths are the heavy lifters. The bees and the butterflies get all the glory, but the moths are behind the scenes. There's many more moths out there and doing a lot of work. Right, Jill?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I know that's definitely correct. We don't talk as much about moths as we do about the other more
not as flashy.
Yes.
They can be, but you don't see the flashy ones very often. When I was a kid and was fascinated by insects, I always said, someday I'm going to see a Luna moth. It's going to show up on my porch. Well, I don't think that's going to ever happen, but there are all kinds of things out there. Well, listen, thank you both for being on the show. As I mentioned, all of the information about the National Wildlife Federation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is on my website. Go to MikeNowak.net, and I wish you guys both, and you got to keep us posted about what's happening in the wonderful world of pollinators. We all need to do our part and help out. Thank you, Mary Phillips. Thank you, Jill Utrup. We will be back. We're talking about the Mackinac Bridge next. For those of you on the network, go green or
go home.
Thank you.
Guys. Mad naked.
The Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com. Here they are again, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
All I need is good food to eat and make me healthy, wealthy, wide awake. Lettuce, tomatoes, root and bacon. What about those sweet potatoes? All I need is good food to eat. All I need is good food to eat. All I need is good tools to make.
Welcome to the second hour of the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and at the moment we are busily. I'm seeing.
There's Mr. McNeil.
Mr. McNeil is there on the line. We are. And
there's Liz.
And there's Liz too. Boy, just as I was about to tap dance here, I don't have to tap dance at all because our guests are showing up. Mitch, you can unmute. And there's Liz Kirkwood also on the phone. Both of you, go ahead and unmute your computers. Liz,
Hi,
good morning. Yeah.
Good morning.
So tell us each where you are. Liz Kirkwood is an environmental attorney and executive director of For the Love of Water, also known as FLOW, FLOW. Where are you zooming in from?
I'm zooming in from Traverse City, Michigan, where it's an absolutely beautiful day.
Ah, wonderful. I hope it's a little less humid than it is here in Chicago today. Mitch McNeil chairs Surfrider Chicago, is a friend of the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. And you're up in the wilds of Michigan somewhere as well, too, right, Mitch?
Yeah, I'm. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just north of the Duck Lake Channel outlet near Whitehall, Montague.
Oh, okay.
North of Muskegon.
Aha. Okay. Now I'm familiar with all of that because I grew up in Michigan. It's my home state, and my folks used to drag all of us up to the northern Lower Peninsula and into the UP. Spent a number of years in rental cottages by the Straits of Mackinac. And let's clarify that because people, they write it differently, they pronounce it differently. From what I remember of my misspent youth, it's spelled Mackinac, but you pronounce it Mackinac. Is that right?
Well, it's Mackinac with a W for Mackinac City, and then Mackinac with a C for the island.
Exactly. And some people say, there's Fort Michilimackinac, and so that's where you get some of the Mackinac. It's just that. So if you say Mackinac or Mackinac, it's basically the same thing. So we know what you're talking about.
It's just a matter of somebody looks at you and says, tourist.
Right. And there's Mitch doing a screenshot of himself on. That's hilarious. I've never done that before. I should do that too. I may do that before.
So for those who are new to the show, you can go and watch us on Zoom. On Facebook at the Mike Nowak Show, as well as on YouTube and Periscope. Don't go on Zoom.
Yeah, you'd be on the show with us.
Yes.
So what folks need to know who are in other parts of the country, and a lot of Chicagoans know about Michigan, that Lake Michigan and Lake Huron come together at the Straits there. It's about 4 miles across, and that's where the beautiful, beautiful Mackinac Bridge is. But it's also a point where there's a pipeline, what is called the Enbridge 5 line, that goes across the Straits as well. And it's a pipeline that was built in 1953. So it's 67 years old.
It's actually two pipelines.
Right. There's an east line and a west line. And they pump all kinds of gas and oil through that every day. And I can't tell you how complex this story is. I was sitting yesterday writing my blog and trying to put all the pieces together. And you guys study this a lot. Mitch, not so much you, but certainly Liz, you do. This story is complex and Byzantine in some ways. So why don't you tell us about the efforts? There have been efforts because the pipelines are just lying on the floor of the lake and have been for 67 years. And people are concerned that there could be a leak, because if there's one thing you know about pipelines, they all leak, all of them. And if we if we allow that to happen, the two of the greatest freshwater bodies in the world will be contaminated. So that's our starting point. Tell us about what Flow is trying to do in regard to these pipelines.
Well, thank you, Mike, for inviting me to the show. This is a real honor to talk with people in the Chicago area, because what really unites us all are these Great Lakes. This is, 20% of the planet's fresh surface water, and these are extraordinary resources that we must vigilantly protect. The story about Line 5 is unique in that 67 years ago, Enbridge could never have built these pipelines except that they were able to get express permission from the state of Michigan, who are the defenders, and they're the protectors of our public waters and public lands. And so the agreement between the state of Michigan and Enbridge is a very unique one, and it's a public trust easement. And that means that Enbridge has to comply and use due care, act like a reasonably prudent person, and follow all of the express terms of that agreement. Now, public trust law is complicated, and we're not going to be able to tease it out in less than 20 minutes. But in a nutshell, what it says is that every state in the U.S. has a legal perpetual duty to protect those public trust waters and bottom lands in perpetuity for the benefit of the people. And the protection of the public's interest is paramount to that of any private interest. So in today's mindset, we would never have placed a pipeline on the lake bed floor in the heart of the Great Lakes. But they are there. It is a legacy that we have to address. And Enbridge's track record has been troubling, very, very troubling over the past 67 years. On the land-based portions of this pipeline, it's leaked over 33 instances, leading to over 1 million gallons of oil into Michigan's land and water bodies. And
including, if I may stop you there, including a very infamous spill in Kalamazoo, actually Marshall, Michigan, in 2010, which was the greatest inland spill in the history of the United States. And Enbridge themselves counted over 1 million gallons that spilled there in Marshall. So you can imagine how much more actually leaked out of that pipe.
Right. So that incident was will be marking the 10-year anniversary on July 25th, 2020, and that was on Enbridge's other pipeline, Line 6B. So that crosses southern Michigan. And following that unbelievable disaster that the National Transportation Safety Board described as, the Keystone Cops being in charge with this culture of real disrespect for pipeline safety. Enbridge was able to double the capacity of its pipeline to pump 800,000 barrels per day from Chicago to Stockbridge, and so it's unfortunate that
through 6B. Was that in 6B?
Yeah, Line 6B, which is now named 78.
Yeah, we'll change history here.
Pay no attention behind the curtain.
We're just changing the name here.
Right. But I think the point, just for listeners, is to understand that Enbridge has these two very, very significant pipelines in the state of Michigan. Line 6B carries heavy tar sands. Line 5 carries refined tar sands or light crude, but also about 20% of the product is natural gas liquids. Following what Michigan's worst disaster ever, Enbridge got permission to double its capacity, at which point would have been an ideal opportunity for the state of Michigan to decommission Line 5, given the extraordinary risk that it poses to our Great Lakes, to the treaty rights. There are 5 federally recognized tribes up in the Straits, and these are the spawning grounds for the whitefish that we all love to eat every summer. The economic damage would be extraordinary. $6.3 billion impact to property, to tourism, not to mention the drinking water to over 50 million Michiganders. And imagine if we had a BP oil spill of that size in our Great Lakes. It would just be absolutely, unfathomable. And I think, that's why people all around the Great Lakes should care about this. The economic impact would be devastating.
You mentioned
the
something.
Shipping would just come to a grinding halt.
And I hadn't thought about that until yesterday. You and I had a very brief conversation, and I said, the impacts will be felt, and you said, but the shipping would just stop. And just imagine the economic impact of that if there were an oil spill.
Yeah.
All right, we need to break. A couple of things I want to talk about when we come back is the fact that Enbridge is not even an American company; it's a Canadian company,
and the oil is not American oil.
And it's going through Michigan and right back into Canada. It was something that we need to know about. We have Liz Kirkwood from Flow for Love of Water, Mitch McNeil, and we will get to you, Mitch. Don't worry about it, from Surfrider Chicago, because there are issues with our water here in the Chicago area. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be right back. On Facebook and YouTube.
I think one of the points also on the spill is it's not, people think, oh, surface and everything else. No, it's how much is going to stay on the bottom if there were some sort of a leak, and how hard it would be to get to up in the Straits, and the currents up there. That's it.
Absolutely.
When you're sailing the Mac race, that's the joke that, okay, there's 10 miles to the island, and that 10 miles could take 10 hours because of the currents.
Right. I think the emphasis, Peggy, and I appreciate you raising this, of understanding the extraordinary wild nature of the Straits of Mackinac cannot be understated, overstated, excuse me. It has been described as the worst possible place for an oil spill by University of Michigan's Professor David Schwab in his 2016 studies. It's, we know that, in a best case scenario, the Coast Guard, who are the first responders, the best, what they could clean up would be about 30% of a spill. That's considered doing the job right. And in, what we would accept as a good outcome does not comport with that.
Sticking around.
Is there anything specific, Mitch, that you want to touch on?
As an organization located in Illinois, we're largely spectators to what's going on between Enbridge and the state of Michigan. But I'm just galvanized by the facts of the situation. So I've put all of our resources into a public awareness building campaign that has been 3 or 4 years in the making now, and we're doing everything we can to educate people about what's going on with our Great Lakes water.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, people as
30 seconds.
Okay, 30
Thanks,
seconds.
Nancy.
As Liz said, it's important that the people of Chicago know what's going on up there. So
AM and FM.
Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron, flow down to Lake Erie, fall to Ontario, run on out to sea.
welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Got to have a Lake Michigan song in there. There's plenty been written over the years. From what I understand, that particular was a Shel Silverstein song, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, we have Liz Kirkwood on the Zoom with us from Flow for Love of Water. and Mitch McNeil from Surfrider Chicago. We're talking about the Straits of Mackinac, the Enbridge 5 pipeline, which cuts right across parallel to the Mackinac Bridge, pretty much. And what that means. When we broke, I got into the subject of Enbridge, the Enbridge company, energy company. They're not even an American company; it's a Canadian company, and they're using the pipeline to, they're using Michigan as a shortcut because they don't want to go around Lake Superior and build a pipeline there and send their oil to Canada. And a lot of that oil doesn't even end up in Michigan, as far as I know. So, what's going on with the deference to this company? Is it just typical deference that our governments in the United States do to fossil fuel companies, or is there something else going on here, Liz?
When I think about what is at stake and how what is the legacy that brought a pipeline to be located in one of the most dangerous locations on the planet, I have to think about what it was like back in 1953. We came out of World War II, and there was a real sense that humans could do the impossible. And this was one of the first pipelines that was ever built underwater across such a vast distance. And at the time, I think there was a lot of thought about innovation and progress, and we didn't have that same care of an understanding of what an oil spill would do to such an ecologically important place like the Great Lakes. And so unfortunately, I think that's how it really ended up there. But even under the Governor Snyder administration, I think one thing that's really clear is that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Nobody would have built or authorized a pipeline like this today. We understand a lot more.
And yet there it sits. And now the question is what to do with it. And you mentioned Governor Snyder. Rick Snyder was governor until 2018 and then got replaced by Gretchen Whitmer and the Attorney General as well, Dana Nessel. And she campaigned on the issue of getting rid of the Enbridge 5 pipeline. I wonder how much that had to do with their election in Michigan. Is it a big issue, or is it just?
Oh, yes. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, Line 5 was the definitive environmental issue in the 2018 election. Absolutely. And both AG Dana Nessel and Governor Whitmer campaigned on it. I will say that Attorney General Dana Nessel has just been an extraordinary champion for the Great Lakes with Line 5, and last year, actually, this is remarkable, exactly a year ago, June 27th, she filed the legal action to revoke the easement that allows and authorizes Enbridge to essentially be a tenant there with conditional permission. And then, of course, on Monday, she filed a TRO, a temporary restraining order, and a preliminary injunction to shut and halt the flow of oil in this pipeline because of the discovery of recent damage from one of these anchor supports that is trying to brace this pipeline on the lake bed because there's massive erosion and extremely powerful currents that were not anticipated with the original engineering design.
Now that's there's a lot to digest there. As you say, Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, filed last year to revoke the easement rights. And actually, that's the case that a couple of weeks ago was turned back in court. And then, days later, literally, Enbridge says, "Oh yeah, there was some damage.
Oh, by the way,
we're not going to give you the specifics of it. We're actually not going to show you what happened, but We checked it out, and the east line, yeah, we're going to kind of shut it down for a little bit. We've reopened the west line, and of course, the governor was outraged. Gretchen Whitmer was outraged because they did it without coming to the state and saying this had happened. There's absolutely no transparency here. That had to be an outrage to environmentalists throughout the state.
And I was going to say, and then Thursday, the circuit court judge that came in and put another temporary cease on operations.
Yeah, no, the governor was just outraged because, Enbridge did not provide the type of evidence that is warranted, when you have a crisis like this. This is a really important point, is that since 2014, with the exception of the year 2015, Enbridge has had a remote operated vehicle, an ROV, which does a visual inspection of this pipeline every year. So they do both internal investigations and then external investigations. And every time they go, they have divers and they do the ROVs in the water, they discover some other violation. And remember, this pipeline, the original design was to rest on the lake bed floor. The currents are almost double what the Bechtel engineers designed back in 1953. And as a result, for the past 20 years, Enbridge has basically put this pipeline on life support. And they've done that by creating this anchoring system, which are basically a number of braces, because it's shifting and torquing all over the lake bed. And the
all right, we got to hold it right there. Here's our break, and we'll come back. We'll finish the story and talk about the proposed tunnel to put the pipe in. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki.
And hear from Mitch.
I know there's so much to tell you in this story.
I know this is why I was tearing my hair out yesterday. I'm writing this thing, and I'm going. I'm only going to get this half right. I was trying to cover everything. Then there's all this lack of transparency, and then there's, as I said, this deference to this company, and who knows what the actual numbers are? Do the people of Michigan actually benefit from this pipeline? It seems like they don't. So
they really don't, and I don't know, Mike, if you want to have resources, but one of the big issues that Enbridge is raising is about the fact that the Upper Peninsula won't be able to have propane. And this has been an issue that we've been vigorously addressing for many years, because as we know, it's much better to plan for the decommissioning of a pipeline. So 2 years ago, the London Economic International put together a very important report that said if we make the transition, decommission the line, we can extend a railroad and then truck in propane to make sure that we have energy, reliable energy sources for the Upper Peninsula residents. And that's really, really critical. Enbridge has tried to mount this PR campaign for years, saying that we're going to freeze the grannies in the UP, and that is not that it will not happen if you properly plan for this process of decommissioning.
Yeah, I know that. Well, it's all PR. It's all about PR, and no matter how you transport oil and gas, it's dangerous. That's just the way it is. It's one of the reasons we need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels.
Right.
Because whether it's a truck and it's blowing up in Quebec or the North Dakota or wherever, you've got safety issues.
Yeah, or it's external damage. Like before with an anchor, that some freighter or something
that's the other thing,
is trying to not hit the bridge in an emergency situation, and they hit the pipeline.
We need about 3 hours for this topic, Mike.
Yeah, we need a part two. Seriously,
we do.
There will be a part two because this is ongoing, and it's. I think it's going to continue here, and I hope it turns out well. I really do, but yikes.
Place we separate Canada. We're the Great Lakes. We separate Canada from the United States. The Great Lakes are the largest body of fresh water on Earth to date. We're the Great Lakes. There are only 5 of us to celebrate the Great Lakes. Come visit all of us and you'll appreciate. I'm Lake Michigan.
Can you tell which one is that I got from a children's network? Okay. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. But I heard that. I went, oh yeah, I'm so playing that song. We are talking about the Enbridge 5 pipeline across the Straits of Mackinac. We have Liz Kirkwood from For Love of Water and Mitch McNeil from Surfrider Chicago. Mitch, I'm going to give you your chance here. One of the things we were talking about during the break is the unprecedented water levels, which throws a monkey wrench into all of this right now. You're experiencing that up where you are right now, right?
Yeah, I'm on the lake, and we certainly have a ringside seat to the tremendous and unprecedented spike in the water levels. You know, it was only in 2013 that we had water levels so low that the people that own marinas around here were thinking about going out of business. There was not enough water to float the boats.
Yeah, you're up in Whitehall and Montague.
Yeah, so White Lake is the nearest
White Lake.
Yeah. And in 7 short years, we've just seen it spike up to what I think is a record high. And the geological kind of bell curve for high and low water usually says there's about 20 years between a low and a high. They've been keeping records going back, less than 200 years. So we're on some sort of new kind of on steroid spike here that I can only think comes from climate disruption.
Yeah, we talk about it on the show all the time. In fact, in our next segment, our meteorologist, Rick DeMaio, we'll ask him about water levels there. We just had a lot of rain this week again. So it just continues, and there's a possibility we will hit a new high this year, surpassing the one in 1986. We'll get back to you in a second, Mitch. Let's get back to Liz, and we were talking about how this fight to over the right of way is there, and what Enbridge is doing with this very fragile pipeline in the bottom of, as you say, one of the most dangerous parts of the planet because of all the currents that are there. It is very wild up there. If you've never been in the Straits, you think, well, it's a great lake, but they're huge, and it's 4 miles of pipeline on the bottom of the lake floor. So a couple of years ago, Enbridge says, oh, we can fix that. We'll dig a tunnel, and we'll put the pipelines in a tunnel. Mission accomplished. And of course, the Snyder administration passed the approval of that with like 2 seconds to spare before they were ousted. And now there's court battles about whether all of that was legal. So where does that stand right now, the idea of a tunnel, Liz?
Well, first off, I want to just really underscore the fact that the issue about the tunnel is really a distraction from the most important issue for anybody living in the Great Lakes, which is that Line 5 continues to operate every single day, pumping 23 million gallons of oil through the heart of the Great Lakes. When before we go and start thinking about building a tunnel, remember this pipeline is part of a very complex system that there are pipeline battles in Minnesota with Line 3, which is Line 5 is connected. This is, these are connected to the tar sands, which are the dirtiest fossil fuels on the planet. And at a time in a post, a global pandemic, what we are seeing is that we can and we must pivot absolutely now to renewable energies. And so the issue of whether or not we even need Line 5 is has been thwarted because Enbridge has decided that the tunnel is the best option. Well, the tunnel is the best option for Enbridge, but what about the state of Michigan? Because if you build they say it's only $500 million. Well, it could be $1 billion or $2 billion, depending on tectonics and other very serious issues. you have to rebuild the entire rest of the pipeline, and we're going to end up with a stranded asset that we don't need, because as Peggy had pointed out earlier, the majority, 90% of the product in this pipeline comes and goes back to Canada. There is very little economic benefit to the state of Michigan, and most importantly, there are very smart options, and we're using existing pipelines, but more importantly, we are becoming, we can see there is a shift. Renewable energies are taking in a very important role in our energy portfolio, and in fact, they are outpacing. Coal is off the table. Coal is no longer it's not part of the portfolio that we even talk about. It's extraordinary how rapidly things are changing. That's the point.
And
here.
The price of oil figures into it, right?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. I mean, you think about just 7 years ago, where for a barrel of oil, it was over $95 a barrel of oil, and now it's. It was going into the negative numbers a couple of weeks ago. Unheard of. So there's the idea of a tunnel is really, I think, really foolhardy when you think about what we really should be investing in. What is the energy future that we want, and where are the other jobs? Let's talk about rebuilding our water infrastructure. That is the most important thing that all of our communities need. If you can't have access to safe, affordable, clean water, you can't build things, you can't live.
Let's follow the money for a second. We know that Enbridge benefits from the pipeline. We know the people of Michigan really do not. The numbers don't add up. Who's benefiting from this? Why is there such a push to keep this pipeline going?
This is about shareholder investments, and and this is a piece of infrastructure that has been paid off. It's 67 years old. Enbridge is fighting in Minnesota to rebuild line 3, and they are facing lots of bumps in the road because there's very fierce collaboration between tribes and the people of Minnesota who don't want another tar sands pipeline being there. But
we're going to have to get to Mitch here. Mm-hmm. Just final question for you. What do you think the final outcome is going to be on this? Do you have a sense of that?
Are you asking Mitch or me?
No, I'm asking you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, what I'll just say very quickly is that on Tuesday we have a preliminary hearing to see what happens, and this is going to be under the rule of law. Enbridge has the burden not only to show that they can protect this pipeline, but they have to show that this pipeline condition that's located in the strait complies with our public trust law. Mm-hmm. And they have to show that this issue with the anchor, it's not that they're going to say that it's this isolated and fixable issue, but remember there are 200 supports that are elevating this kind of underwater suspension bridge.
And this could happen again and again and again. Yeah. All right, Mitch, let's go to you because you keep an eye on the lower end of Lake Michigan, around Indiana and Illinois. What are you working on right now?
Well, for the past 3 years, we've been working on a legal action against U.S. Steel. In 2017, they discharged hundreds of pounds of hexavalent chromium into a waterway that feeds into Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. They were given a slap on the wrist financial penalty from the government, $600,000. and a consent decree that has no teeth. So we've been fighting that every step of the way, and it's been pretty tough. We're fighting an uphill battle with U.S. Steel. They seem to be buddy with this administration, anti-regulatory administration that it is.
You mean the national administration?
Yeah, and then the state of Indiana is also really friendly to industry. So,
and we haven't yet mentioned the words Republican or Democrat yet, although everybody in the world knows what we're talking about here. Okay.
I have to.
No, you don't.
So it's been an uphill battle, and for this period of time, I think mostly it's been about raising awareness on what's going on in the South End. And it's not just U.S. Steel, it's ArcelorMittal. They put a bunch of ammonia in the water last summer that killed thousands of fish. So that's a separate legal battle that's being shouldered by some other environmental groups.
Yeah,
and we're kind of cheering them on from the sidelines. But I do want to mention there was a
you got like 10 seconds. Make it quick.
Okay, yeah, there's a high court case involving groundwater that has given us new kind of ammunition to fight this. Groundwater being part of the Clean Water Act, so we're attacking it from a new angle now.
And you're getting a thumbs up from Liz, so thank you so much.
Yeah,
Mitch McNeil, there's information on Surfrider Chicago at my website. Liz Kirkwood, there's information about For Love of Water. Thank you both. We will keep up to date on this. We will be back with Rick DeMaio after this. What, Peggy?
It's the groundwater issue, Mitch.
Yeah, what about it?
Where can we read about that? Or can you send us a link?
Yeah, I'll send you some background on that. It's kind of exciting. Happened in Maui. High court decision involving groundwater, and it affects what we're doing directly, I think. So
okay,
it has my legal team very excited.
It's hugely significant.
Oh, well, see, now I know what we're going to talk about next time.
Part
Mitch.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. We'll get you back on.
So, can I just say one quick thing, which is that we've been digging into a lot of groundwater work, and we call it the 6th Great Lake because the amount of water of groundwater that feeds the Great Lakes is the size of Lake Huron. That would be a 6th Great Lake. And it gives a visual for people to understand how important this resource is.
So you're looking at the whole watershed.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm talking about the entire Great Lakes watershed.
The Great Lakes watershed. Okay.
Right. But
Yeah.
it is, out of sight, out of mind, and just totally abused. But just like Mitch is saying, it's the interconnect, it's the cycle, the whole water cycle, and its interconnectedness to everything.
Yeah.
It's vitally important.
All right.
FM. What's the weather? It's sunny. What's the weather? It's rainy altogether. That's the weather. Sun, rain, wind, storm, hot, cold, cool, warm. What's the weather? It's cloudy. What's the weather? It's windy altogether. That's the weather.
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. I don't even remember where I got that. I'm thinking we make that Rick's theme song. It's time for meteorologist Rick DeMaio. And Rick, I don't know if you were listening to the previous segment.
You mean PJ Huff?
I'm sorry, what?
What?
You mean PJ Huff, if you're going to play that music, right?
I don't know who you're referring to. Sorry.
No idea.
PJ Huff? PJ Huff was the legendary meteorologist in Chicago back in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, well, I grew up in Detroit, so we had Sonny Elliott.
Yeah, I know. You had Sonny Elliott. I worked with Sonny Elliott for a while.
Did you really? I did too at WWJ. So
yeah, I used to do the weather. I used to do the weather phone.
Cool. He was
no doubt that.
he was a character, no doubt about it.
He was a character.
But I'm not familiar with PJ, so sorry about that.
PJ's a big guy. That's okay. That's all right.
I will look. I will look it up.
So you were talking about the previous segment.
Yeah, we were talking about Lake Michigan and the Enbridge 5 pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac, and talking about high water levels. And right on cue, you send us the Army Corps of Engineers weekly Great Lakes water level update. And I think what's kind of interesting is you can't treat all of the Great Lakes as one, because everybody each of them has their own level. So for instance, Lake Superior, it says the forecasted level was 4 inches lower than it was a year ago, and Lake Erie and Ontario are receiving less than 60% of their typical month-to-date precipitation. But here in Michigan, Lake Michigan, and go ahead.
Yeah, the best way to really describe this to your listeners is that most of the water that flows into Lake Superior comes from either melting snow in parts of Ontario, but also the fact that much of that area is pretty flat. So Lake Superior has to get their rain from literally southern areas of Canada and the UP of Michigan. And the UP of Michigan doesn't really have a lot of water flow into Lake Superior. Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are basically the same, because as you go through the Straits of Mackinac, the water at that point is pretty much a bridge between Michigan and Huron. So whatever Michigan has, Huron has. Now, there may be a little bit of a difference from one day to the other, just based on heavy rain or wind and stuff like that. But what's interesting, Mike, I was back in the East Coast just this past week, and it was amazing how dry everything is, particularly your public greenways in parts of New Jersey and also parts of Pennsylvania. So most of those areas in upstate New York, those are the areas that feed into Lake Ontario. They're down about 5 to 6 inches so far for this year. Also, there's been an extraordinary amount of heat across southeast Canada and also northern sections of New England, and heat this time of the year evaporates water. So Lake Ontario is almost 2 feet lower than what it was last year. Lake Erie, not as much, but clearly Lake Michigan and Lake Huron pretty much have been getting deluged, month after month after month. And even though we've had some recent heavy rain here, you look back at the last 30 days, and the core of heavy rain, which was over Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana in the month of May, kind of shifted out into Minnesota, Iowa, and parts of Missouri, and all that water basically flows into the Mississippi River. So this has actually been somewhat of a good weather pattern to get the levels of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron down, and it looks like that pattern will continue, Mike.
Oh, well, that's good news for people on the lake, obviously, because we're very near that record level. You don't so judging from what you're saying, it sounds like we will not hit a new record.
No, I don't think we'll get to the record in the month of July. It looks like we're getting into a little bit hotter pattern, a little bit less in the way of organized precipitation. So again, even though we got deluged on Thursday, that was a real small area, basically southern Wisconsin, central sections of Illinois. You really need those large-scale, widespread severe weather outbreaks that goes on for a couple of days over a large area to really get those levels up. But as we've seen in the past, the month of August, particularly towards the latter half, it's been getting wetter and wetter, especially if we begin to see somewhat of an influence of the tropics. So my bet is that we'll probably end up somewhat below normal rainfall for the month of July. And as we head into the second half of August and into September, we'll go right back up and probably exceed the record that you were talking about earlier, which was back in 1986.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
Not a good record to have.
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, especially if you live on the lake. We have just a couple of minutes, but real quickly, I want to say last week you were the one that alerted me to the sand cloud over the Sahara, and it became a big story over the week and spreading across the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the United States, and some of it's going to go into the center of the country.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is actually going to get into the center of the country. I was actually looking at an analysis, basically a satellite view this morning, and I'm looking at it right now. And this is what they call the SAL, Saharan Air Layer. It's very common. It happens every year, and it's been happening for several hundred years. I just think that the more advanced satellite technology that we have now gives us a better idea of not only the extent of it, from an aerial coverage, but also the thickness of it, and that's what we refer to as the optics. This layer is fairly wide, but it's not as thick as what we've seen in the past. But I'm looking at it right now, and it basically, the northern edge covers all of Florida, the southern half of Alabama, almost all of South Carolina, and into North Carolina. And the reason why it's not going to get into the Midwest is basically rain. So we're going to rain on top of that Saharan air layer, and then the southerly winds will kind of get knocked down as well. It really has zero impact on short-term weather or climate. I think it's more so just kind of interesting to talk about.
Well, but you did say it does have a bit of an impact on hurricane formation.
Oh, yeah. I'm talking about here in the United States. So when people say, oh, my God, what's it going to do to us? Nothing, except it may make your sky a little bit more hazier. But how often do we have here in the Midwest smoke coming all the way in from wildfires in Canada, and people don't go nuts over it? We just talk about it as like, wow, that's really cool. But it does tend to suppress.
We look at the pretty sunsets
from a hurricane.
All right, give us a forecast.
Yeah, you noticed that last night, but that actually wasn't the Sahara air layer. That was a little bit of smoke still coming in from parts of Minnesota and also southern areas of Canada, Peg.
All right, we need a quick forecast.
All right, so basically warm and humid the next 5 to 7 days. Rain a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, but other than that, just standard pop-up thunderstorms, nothing in the way of extreme heat and nothing in the way of severe weather.
Okay, Rick, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, man. I want to thank everybody on the show today. Mary Phillips, Jill Utrup, Liz Kirkwood, Mitch McNeil. Thank you, Nancy, for running the board. Thank you, Randall. Until next time, go green or
go home.
Stadler?
What?
Is that it?
Yes, it's over. How'd you like it?
I don't know. I slept through the whole thing.
Well, you didn't miss much.